Imagine your phone rings late in the day. A family member tells you that someone you love isn't answering their calls. At first, you don't think much of it. Maybe they're sleeping. Maybe they left their phone in another room. But then another hour passes. Then another. So someone decides to drive over and check on them. They never return. A second family member goes looking for them. They never come back either. But here's what makes this case different from many stories you'll hear online. Much of what captured national attention comes from court documents and prosecutors' allegations, and those claims have not yet been proven in court. So, in today's video, we're going to carefully separate confirmed facts from allegations while walking through everything investigators say happened. Before we begin, if you enjoy true crime documentaries that are well-researched, respectful, and easy to follow, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Crime Chronicle, and click the bell icon so you never miss another case. Now, let's get into today's story. Our story begins in East St. Louis, Illinois, a city where many families have known each other for generations. It's the kind of place where grandparents live just minutes away from their children, cousins grow up together, and neighbors still notice when something doesn't seem right. For the May and Thompson family, life appeared ordinary from the outside. Like most families, they had their ups and downs, celebrated birthdays together, checked in on one another, and stayed connected. No one could have imagined that within a matter of hours, their lives would be changed forever. At the center of the family was 74-year-old Patricia May. She wasn't simply a grandmother. She was someone her relatives depended on, the person who checked in on everyone and made sure the family stayed close. Friends described her as caring, protective, and always willing to help whenever someone needed her. Her family included Sherry May, Devin May, Quentin Thompson, and Shania Thompson. Each of them had their own lives, their own dreams, and their own plans for the future. None of them woke up knowing they would become part of one of the most shocking homicide investigations Illinois had seen in years. As investigators would later learn, another relationship was quietly developing behind the scenes. According to court records, 16-year-old Ymeir Davis was dating a 15-year-old girl who belonged to the May and Thompson family. Because she is a juvenile, authorities have not released her identity publicly, and throughout this case, she has remained protected under juvenile court rules. To most people, it probably looked like an ordinary teenage relationship. But prosecutors allege there were growing tensions between the couple and certain members of the girl's family. Exactly how serious those disagreements were remains a matter for the courts, but investigators would later point to digital communications they say became an important part of understanding what happened. At that point, however, no one in the family knew detectives would one day be examining those messages. Then, everything changed. It didn't begin with gunshots heard by neighbors. It didn't begin with flashing police lights. And it didn't begin with someone calling 911. Instead, it began with silence. According to investigators, Sherry May suddenly stopped answering her phone. At first, nobody panicked. Think about it for a second. We've all had moments when we forgot to charge our phones or missed a few calls because we were busy. That's exactly why her family didn't immediately assume something terrible had happened. They called again. No answer. They sent messages. Still nothing. As the hours passed, concern slowly replaced reassurance. Family members began asking each other the same question. Have you heard from Sherry? Everyone had the same answer. No. What nobody realized was that investigators would later allege Sherry had already become the first victim. Without knowing that, the family continued trying to reach her, believing there had to be a simple explanation. Then another decision was made. Instead of continuing to call, someone suggested they should drive over and check on her personally. It sounded like the obvious thing to do. After all, that's what families do. When someone you love isn't answering the phone, you don't automatically assume the worst. You check on them. You knock on their door. You make sure they're safe. No one making that decision could have imagined they were about to walk into what prosecutors would later describe as the beginning of a carefully unfolding tragedy. And with that single decision, investigators say the timeline of one of the most heartbreaking family homicide cases in recent memory truly began. The first person who decided to go looking for Sherry was 24-year-old Devin May. From everything investigators have shared, there was nothing unusual about his decision. If one of your relatives suddenly stopped answering their phone, you'd probably do the same thing. Devin wasn't expecting to uncover a crime. He simply wanted to make sure his family member was okay. According to prosecutors, when Devin arrived at Sherry's home, he walked inside. He never walked back out. Investigators allege Devin became the second victim. At that point, no one else in the family knew what had happened. From their perspective, they now had two loved ones who had suddenly vanished without explanation. You can almost imagine the conversations that must have been taking place. Maybe they're together. Maybe their phones died. Maybe they're on the way back. People naturally search for the least frightening explanation first. But as more time passed, those explanations became harder to believe. Then Patricia May decided she couldn't wait any longer. At 74 years old, Patricia had spent most of her life looking after the people she loved. Family members described her as someone who always stepped in whenever something seemed wrong. Sitting at home and wondering wasn't an option. According to investigators, Patricia went to the same location hoping to find Sherry and Devin. Instead, prosecutors allege she became the third victim. If that timeline is accurate, it's one of the most heartbreaking parts of this entire case. Each person believed they were rescuing someone they loved, never realizing they were walking into the very danger they were trying to stop. While all of this was unfolding, the rest of the family still didn't understand what was happening. According to charging documents, Quentin Thompson and his sister, Shania Thompson, also became victims during the same sequence of events. Authorities have not publicly described every detail surrounding their deaths because the criminal case is still pending, but prosecutors allege both siblings were intentionally killed. The violence didn't end there. Two other relatives, Tiffany Thompson and Santasha Scott, were also shot but survived. Their injuries were serious, but unlike the others, they lived through the attack. Those survivors would later become an important part of the investigation as detectives worked to reconstruct the events of that day. Before long, emergency calls began reaching dispatchers. Police officers arriving at the scenes quickly realized they weren't responding to a routine shooting. What they found suggested several violent incidents connected by one family. Investigators immediately secured each location, making sure no evidence was disturbed. Crime scene specialists photographed every room, marked the locations of shell casings, searched for fingerprints, collected DNA evidence, and documented anything that might help explain how the events unfolded. At first, the investigation seemed overwhelming. Multiple victims, multiple locations, dozens of witnesses, hundreds of questions. Detectives had to determine not only who was responsible, but also the exact order in which everything happened. That wasn't going to be easy. Every interview added another piece to the puzzle. Neighbors described unusual activity. Family members explained when they last spoke with the victims. Surveillance cameras from nearby homes and businesses were reviewed frame by frame. Little by little, investigators began assembling a timeline. They also turned their attention to technology. Modern homicide investigations rarely rely on physical evidence alone. Cell phone records, location data, text messages, social media activity, and surveillance footage often become just as important as fingerprints or DNA. In this case, investigators say those digital records help them understand the movements of both the victims and the suspects. As detectives analyzed electronic evidence, they reportedly uncovered communications that prosecutors believe shed light on the relationship between the teenage couple and members of the family. Those communications are expected to play an important role in court, although, like many aspects of this case, there remain allegations that have not yet been tested before a jury. Then investigators made another discovery. It was the kind of evidence that immediately drew national attention and left many people struggling to believe what prosecutors were alleging. According to court filings, detectives uncovered evidence they believe connected the suspects to actions taken after several of the killings. That allegation would become one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire investigation and would strengthen the prosecution's case as charges moved forward. By now, investigators believed they were no longer searching for unknown suspects. They believed they knew exactly who they were looking for. The next step was gathering enough evidence to support arrests and prepare for what promised to be one of the most closely watched criminal cases in Illinois. And that's exactly where the investigation takes another shocking turn in the final part of this story. As detectives continued gathering evidence, the investigation quickly shifted from trying to understand what had happened to determining whether they could prove it in court. Every piece of evidence was carefully examined. Phones were sent to forensic experts. Vehicles were searched. Surveillance footage was reviewed repeatedly. Detectives interviewed family members, neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have crossed paths with the victims or the suspects in the days leading up to the killings. According to prosecutors, one of the most significant breakthroughs came from digital evidence. Investigators alleged they recovered messages exchanged between Ymeir Davis and the 15-year-old girl that helped establish a timeline of events and provided insight into their relationship. Prosecutors have argued that the conversations reflected growing resentment towards certain members of the girl's family, whom they believed disapproved of their relationship. Those messages are expected to become an important part of the prosecution's case. However, they remain allegations until they are fully examined and challenged in court. Then came the allegation that shocked people across the country. According to prosecutors, after Patricia May was killed, her thumb was allegedly removed and later used in an attempt to unlock her cell phone. Investigators have said they recovered the thumb from a vehicle connected to Ymeir Davis during the investigation. If proven in court, prosecutors argue this would suggest an effort to gain access to information stored on Patricia's phone after her death. The allegation immediately made national headlines because of how disturbing it was, but like every other allegation in this case, it has not yet been proven before a jury. As investigators continued reviewing the evidence, they believed they had enough to move forward. Ymeir Davis was arrested and charged in connection with the killings. Because of the seriousness of the allegations, prosecutors sought to have him prosecuted as an adult. The 15-year-old girl was also taken into custody. Since she is a juvenile, many details surrounding her case have remained sealed, and authorities have not publicly released her identity. As the case entered the court system, prosecutors outlined what they believe happened, relying on physical evidence, digital evidence, witness statements, and forensic findings gathered during the investigation. The defense, however, is expected to challenge the prosecution's interpretation of that evidence. Like every criminal defendant, both teenagers are presumed innocent unless and until they are proven guilty in court. That's an important point to remember in a case that has attracted so much attention online. Social media often reaches conclusions long before a courtroom does, but the legal process requires prosecutors to prove every allegation beyond a reasonable doubt. While the criminal proceedings continue, the emotional impact of this tragedy has already been felt throughout East St. Louis. An entire family was shattered. Children lost parents. Parents lost children. A grandmother who had spent her life caring for her family was gone. Brothers, sisters, cousins, and friends were left trying to understand how a day that began with unanswered phone calls ended in unimaginable loss. For many people following this case, one question continues to stand out. Could any of this have been prevented? Could someone have recognized warning signs earlier? Or was this the kind of tragedy that no one could have predicted? Those are questions that investigators, family members, and the community may continue asking for years. As this case moves through the justice system, more evidence will likely be presented, more witnesses may testify, and the public will learn additional details about what prosecutors allege happened inside those homes. Until then, many questions remain unanswered. If the allegations are proven, this case will be remembered as one of the most devastating family homicide cases involving teenage suspects in recent years. If parts of the prosecution's theory are challenged successfully, the courtroom will ultimately decide which facts have been proven and which have not. That's why it's important to follow cases like this all the way through, rather than relying only on early headlines or social media posts. Before we end today's video, I want to leave you with a few questions. What do you think could have motivated a tragedy of this magnitude? Do you believe investigators have uncovered the full truth? Or do you think there are still pieces of this story that haven't come to light? And perhaps the most heartbreaking question of all, if one phone call had been answered that day, do you think this family's story could have ended differently? I'd really like to hear your thoughts, so let me know what you think in the comments below. Please remember to keep the discussion respectful, especially for the surviving family members and everyone's still affected by this tragedy. If you found this case informative and want more in-depth true crime documentaries told with accuracy and respect, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Crime Chronicle, and click the bell icon so you never miss our next upload. Until next time, stay safe.